Got it. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to the Archives Month talk. Tonight we have Dr. Petra DeWitt. She is an associate professor in the history department and an alumni of this university and a student of Dr. Larry Gregg. She has a bachelor's degree in history from 1996. Her research interests are German Americans in Missouri during World War I, but she has expanded her research to include German visitors to the United States. Tonight, she's going to be talking about one of those visitors and what we do and do not know about Ingrid Deich. Deich. Thank you.
Okay.
Take it away, Petra.
Okay. Hello, everybody, in person as well as online. Before I begin my talk here this evening, I want to say a few thank yous. First of all, to my former professors, Dr. Ridley, Dr. Christensen, Dr. Bledsoe, and Dr. Gregg, for telling me about the story of the disappearing professor and to tell me to keep digging into it over the years, okay? Constantly reminding me that this might be a subject I might want to dig into. Also, my thanks to Jerry Cohen, who's our German professor, for having written the first major summary of the events of the disappearance as well. I also want to thank the University Archives and Debbie Griffith for giving me access to Ingrid Deich's personnel records. They were very enlightening. And additional information that I used in order to come up with this presentation and during my research was newspapers, of course. There are lots of dictionaries of professionals out there, and if you're wanting to hide, that's a problem, because if you're ever a professor or another professional, you appear in those dictionaries. The internet, of course, is very helpful, and my subject actually published a couple of books, so they revealed to me a few things about herself as well. This presentation, in essence, outlines Ingrid Deich's becoming a sociology professor at UMR, which is now called MST, then her sudden disappearance, her reappearance, and an evaluation of why she used a unique and perplexing excuse to explain why she disappeared. This is something that professors who are still alive today, with whom I've communicated, they were wondering, why did she use a certain excuse? But at the same time, her publications also tell me something of how she viewed the United States. In other words, she created an America-Bild, or a picture of the United States from her unique perspective. She's a sociologist, so she looks at the everyday person, not a top-down perspective, but a bottom-up perspective. But she also holds certain philosophies, which I will reveal here in a little bit, and they also shaped how she viewed American society. In essence, she viewed American society as many opportunities lost, that there was potential, especially in the 1970s, with the feminist movement, with civil rights movement from the 60s carrying over into the 1970s, labor movements, and so on. So she saw great potential, but also much missed opportunities. So that, in essence, is a summary of her America-Bild. So let me begin by introducing Ingrid Deich. This is a photograph of her driver's license, of her Missouri driver's license. Ingrid was born in 1938 in Berlin. That was before World War II, so the city was not yet divided. According to the notes in her personnel file, her maiden name may have been Stefanowski, because the files identify her father as Fritz Stefanowski, who lived in Düsseldorf in 1979. Ingrid attended the Free University, or Freie Universität, in West Berlin in the early 1960s. She earned her master's degree in German languages and history in 1964. 1964 is also the year that she married her husband, Werner Deich. He originally comes from Braunschweig, which is also in West Germany, okay? Werner Deich continued to work on his PhD in history, and in the meanwhile, she began to work as a research assistant or a research fellow at the University of Saarbrücken in West Germany. You can't hardly get any further westward in West Germany than Saarbrücken itself. And she also served as a secretary for the Association of Protestant Professionals in Stuttgart, which is very near the area where I grew up, okay? These are the buildings. These are a couple of buildings of the university, the Free University in West Berlin. This over here is the Otto Suhr Institute of the Political Science, which opened in 1962. So she would have experienced the opening of this particular building. This is the chemistry building, and it opened in 1963. So she was a student, she would have experienced that as well. So a little bit of an insight of what the university looked like while she was attending. When Renner earned his PhD in 1970, he applied for all sorts of jobs, not just in Germany, but also in the United States. And guess what? The jackpot at Mizzou History Department. He became an assistant professor, and Ingrid followed him very quickly, and she began her PhD studies in sociology in 1972. So it really looked like the two were creating budding careers, right? Ingrid Deich's research is very unique. As a sociologist, she was researching the relationship between scientists, independent scientists, university scientists, national laboratories, and big business, especially national laboratories that were funded by the FRG, the Federal Republic of Germany, okay? So she was looking at the interaction between these four groups: federal government, big business, these laboratories, and these independent / university scientists, okay? And what she revealed in her dissertation and subsequently in an article that she published in Minerva, which is a very well accepted British scholarly journal for sociologists. So she really hit the ball with this article. And what she's arguing is that during the 1970s, German scientists became so influential that they were actually beginning to sit at the table of decision-making processes. So they no longer were these often overlooked university professors, science professors, but they actually participated in the decision-making process between big business and the national federal government in West Germany on what kind of research would be funded for what social purposes. Okay, so that was her dissertation. Now, interestingly, some of this research she conducted actually at nuclear research centers, including at this Kernforschungszentrum Karlsruhe, which happens to be the city where I went to school. And this place, this nuclear research center, also happens to be a place where my father was employed as a mechanic, not a scientist. So she most likely did not meet him, but I would like to think we actually crossed paths at some point, right? So I'm doing this not just because I'm curious about a former professor. I'm also curious from a personal viewpoint, you know. I mean, I want to bring this full circle, right? So we may have met somewhere on a bus, on a streetcar, not knowing each other. Our eyes met and we smiled, and just when we went on, you know, here we are back together again. Anyways, so she was looking at these nuclear research centers as well as that relationship, you know, what influence did scientists have over what kind of research would be undertaking at these national laboratories. And this one was one of the largest national laboratories in Germany in the 1970s. So it was important research she did. Now, what information she learned beyond the relationship of scientists, national laboratories, and national policy, I don't know. All I know is what she published, what she put into her dissertation, and what she published subsequently in that article. Okay, so we can hypothesize all sorts of things. But anyway, she actually did what I can figure a PhD dissertation in record time. She started in 72. She was done by December of 75. Most PhD students do at least 5 years. So this is pretty fast, Okay, so she was done with all of her work in December of 1975. They did not confer the PhD to her that winter. They would do it in May 76, but she in essence had everything done. And she was looking for a job. And there was a job open here on this campus when we still had a sociology department. Okay, so in January of 1976, she begins as an assistant professor in the sociology department. And this is what the campus looked like. I hope you guys can halfway see that, what the campus looked like. This is the HSS Humanities and Social Sciences building. I took this photograph, thank you, from the yearbook of 1975. And this is from the yearbook of 1976. You know, it used to be on the shelf, so it still has the little cart catalog pocket in there when it was scanned. The campus looks a little different than what it does today. There's the physics building, there's Fulton Hall, over there is electrical, environmental, looks totally different today. It looks like there's a shell of a library, and over here on the other side, we definitely see what has disappeared now, and that is a power plant, right? Dr. Deich, as she would be called as the beginning of 1976, really got into her teaching her sociology courses. Initially, she just taught a couple of sections of intro to sociology, but very quickly she went on to a 3-3 teaching load with upper level courses entitled such as industrial sociology or society and its research and development institutions. It's almost similar to what she did with her dissertation, right? According to student evaluations, several students loved her for being knowledgeable and really teaching them something, but also willing to help them. If any student ever had a problem, she would be going beyond what was necessary to help them achieve success. And that is also one of the things that she writes about in her book, the students who were not able to succeed, not because she couldn't help them, but because of societal constraints would keep them from succeeding, okay? Other students totally disliked hers. It was either that they loved her or they hated her. Why? Because she was a disciplinarian. She made sure that things had to be done at certain times, right? And supposedly she had a heavy accent. By speaking with other colleagues whom she knew, other professors, they said no, she was pretty good in her English. There was no heavy accent, a minor one perhaps, but very good. I mean, not a major problem. But her ability to gain a major National Science Foundation research grant and the acceptance of her article with Minerva and improving student evaluations every semester placed her on track for a positive third-year review in 1979. So Ingrid Deich, it appeared, was living the American dream. But then everything changed, quite mysteriously. On Monday, January 29, 1979, just after Ingrid Deich had begun teaching her Special Implications of Energy Use course at 1:30 p.m., a man, some of her students suspected it was her husband, came to her class, knocked on the door, motioned her outside. She returned after a short while, appeared somewhat distracted to several students, but completed the lecture. She then also taught the next lecture entitled Intro to Social Factors in Technology, Energy, and Society. And this course began at 2:30 and was done by, they had different schedules back then on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So the hour thereafter, 3:20 probably. Thereafter, she went to the department chair, Aaron Epstein, to his office to notify him that she would not attend that afternoon's faculty meeting because she felt ill. Epstein thought her excuse was not very convincing, but let her go home anyway. One of her colleagues saw her departing the Humanities and Social Science building carrying a large bundle. The following day, January the 30th, a Tuesday, no one saw Dr. Deich, but that was not unusual since she taught a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. Faculty, however, became alarmed on Wednesday, January the 31st, when she did not show up for her scheduled classes. As Epstein noted in an interview repeated in several of the newspaper articles, quote, she was very meticulous about meeting her classes. This is why we were very concerned, unquote. Calls to the Phelps County Hospital revealed she was not there. Contact with Mrs. Tucker, a close neighbor, indicated there were no signs of anyone having been at the house for a day or two. A colleague then went to the house, to the Deich residence that they rented, and reported that mail had accumulated, that newspapers lay uncollected on the porch, that one of the two cars was missing, and there were no tire tracks in the freshly fallen snow. A student also appeared who attempted to deliver typed work that Ingrid Deich had wanted urgently, but he also did not receive an answer. When Ingrid Deich did not teach her classes on Friday, February the 2nd, Department Chair Epstein contacted Deich's thesis advisor and several friends in Columbia, but they too knew nothing of the couple's whereabouts. Epstein then contacted the Rolla Police Department, filed a missing persons report, and with police supervision entered the Deich residence. The apartment was all in order. Nothing was disturbed. The fridge was very well stocked. It appeared that only a few toiletry items and clothing were missing, just as if somebody was going on a vacation. Further investigation revealed that a waitress in South St. Louis County had served a couple speaking in a, quote, heavy, thick German accent, unquote. Acting Rolla Police Chief Gary Osmond was also still waiting for a photograph of Mr. Deich from U.S. Immigration Office in Kansas City, which I thought very interesting. This is the photograph. This is her picture from her driver's license. So they knew immediately what she looked like, right? Because they had that or quickly got that in hand, but they had no idea what Vanner looks like, okay? Apparently Vanner never had a driver's license. Why do I know that? Because Ingrid got a speeding ticket somewhere around Jefferson City. And of course, speeding tickets appear in newspapers, right? So I know that she was commuting between Rolla in 1976 while he was still working up at Mizzou, okay? But that's beside the point. The disappearance event became even more mysterious when, on February the 9th, Department Chair Epstein received a telegram from Ingrid Deich sent from Mexico City on February the 8th. It states in all caps, hopefully you can see that here, very sorry for my disappearance, had to choose between work and marriage, followed Vanner to his New York place in Mexico, form a letter of resignation to follow Ingrid Deich. Not even a stop in between or a period or anything. Well, Department Chair Epstein thought, well, that's really from her. And he thought this is just a typo instead of York that was supposed to mean work, okay? But he was baffled. Why would this woman with a budding career, a major multi-$1,000 National Science Foundation grant, give up this opportunity for her husband and move to Mexico City? In short, the telegram really did not resolve the confusion. Friends in Columbia, including her dissertation advisor, James McCarthy, thought the disappearance, quote, puzzling, just puzzling, unquote, especially considering the opportunity to work for the National Science Foundation in Washington, D.C. for an entire year. Talk about access to information, right? As he stated, quote, that's the kind of thing she does not walk away from, unquote, right? Well, after more police investigation, the telegram is confirmed as being authentic, as having originated in Mexico City, but the Mexican forces refused to look for them because that would be looking like a needle in a haystack or a city of 13 million people. Okay, so everything runs dry at this point, right? Nothing else is appearing. So why did they disappear? Did they really disappear because Vanner had a job subsequently in other communication, we find out Werner supposedly is becoming a consultant in agriculture for some association in Mexico City. Okay. People were even more confused about that and about anything else. So why did the Deich couple disappear? Further investigations only muddled the picture further. Contact with Ingrid's sister in Hamburg and Werner's brother in Braunschweig indicated that friends and relatives were making plans to come to Rolla from Germany, from West Germany, to come to Rolla, visit this area. Why would they disappear if family is planning to come for a visit, right? Had the marriage really become strained to the point that she felt she had to give up her career for him? Well, conversations with friends in Colombia revealed that the Deich marriage had become strained in recent weeks, with Ingrid publicly criticizing or ridiculing Werner for not working and passing his time by conducting research that seemed to go nowhere. Werner, who seemed to have become more reclusive in recent days, confided to a friend that he, quote, hadn't spent all his energy on his education just to sell shoes, unquote. Then the letter of resignation appears in Rolla to only add further confusion about the disappearance. Dear Aaron, the department chair, please consider this my formal resignation effective immediately. I want once more to express my great regrets for my sudden exit. Seeing myself in your shoes, probably no excusation would satisfy me. But let me tell you that these are difficult times for many marriages of two professionals. My professional satisfaction did not compensate Werner for a lack of demand for his qualifications. I tell myself, and you know that nobody is indispensable in a formal organization, but individuals are irreplicable in a primary relationship. I'm including the two UMR keys for the department. My best wishes to you and the department, Ingrid Deich. Well, okay. So she's concerned about the apartment, right? So she's submitting the two keys that the apartment will be taken care of, because after all, it belongs to the university, okay? It's actually on 14th Street that way. But it also tells you a little bit about how she views American society, right? That at this time, she views that couples made up of two professionals have problems. So she's trying to relate her excuse to her perception of what American society is, right? That if one partner in this marriage, in this union, is dissatisfied, the other partner has to help that partner feel better about him or herself, right? So yeah, I mean, you can read between the lines. You do see a little bit of her accent as well, excusation and irreplicable. I would not have used those words, but that's beside the point, right? So, and then all of a sudden, another person appears, a friend from Colombia, a PhD student. He's just about done with his dissertation. He has to do the defense. We have to remember this is February, so he's just about getting ready to graduate. They had shared an office as teaching assistants while doing their PhD. She was done faster than he was, but he shows up, and he shows up with paperwork, a letter from her, several pages long. Man, she goes into detail. Those books on shelf, and she put a drawing in there, and she identified each shelf with shelf A, shelf B, shelf C, shelf D. Top row of books, please pack up and send to relatives in West Germany. The rest you can sell, you can donate, whatever you want to do. Certain other things, again, clearly identified where they are located to either be packed up to be sent to family in West Germany, or he could sell them for his own trouble, or just toss them out, whatever. It included a power of attorney to sell the two cars. And she reveals where the car is located. It is located at short-term parking at Lambert Airport in St. Louis. Yay, she's helping the police, right? Thanks. Anyways, and it's like Ingrid and Renner Deich authorized so-and-so to sell these cars and that the proceeds go to him for his trouble. There's also a $500 check in there for any and all trouble. They're asking him to pay the bills because cable bills are coming due and so on. She subscribes to the Raleigh Daily News. She subscribes to the New York Times. These things all have to be paid. Geez, she's really concerned about things happening at home, right? But we also learned through this how they left, right? They drove to St. Louis. They got on an airplane and flew to Mexico. We have to realize this was 1979. This is before terrorism, right? You can just go on a plane as long as you have the money in cash for the ticket. Nobody's going to ask any questions whatsoever. Okay. And they both had become, as of 1972, permanent residents of the United States. So they had green cards. So nobody was going to ask any questions whatsoever. Okay. So, but nobody was happy with this outcome. People were wondering, is there something else going on? Could there be a more sinister reason for why the Deich couple left? And we have to put ourselves into the context of history. It is February 1979. There are all sorts of things happening. The Iranian Revolution is about to undergo. If you look at the newspapers from that time period, all you see is the Ayatollah Khomeini. Ayatollah Khomeini is about to come back to Iran and so on, okay? And while people were distracted with that, something else is actually happening in Central Europe. This is the Cold War. It is 1979. This is Brezhnev. This is when the Cold War becomes hotter again, right? And then all of a sudden, headline news. An agent has defected from East Germany to West Germany. His name is Werner Stiller, and he did this exactly 10 days prior to the Deich disappearing. And all kinds of heads are rolling in West Germany. For example, a Bavarian legislator, decision maker, leader, is arrested as an East German spy. Think of all the information he had access to. And the headlines are just full right there during that time period, right? But it took a few days on this campus. And when I was looking at the personnel records, all of a sudden there's somebody, and I don't know who it was yet, somebody who kept notes on a notepad, on a legal pad, and just wrote these things down day by day. And all of a sudden there's a reference to a newspaper article about Werner Stiller having defected, but not yet making the connection, but putting it in there, right? And then the other newspaper articles about the Deich are there. And then all of a sudden there's another article about the impact of Werner Stiller having disappeared. And Werner Stiller really revealed to me personally through his book what happened to these West Germans. He tells me that they began to live in March of 1979 in Leipzig. And if you know your geography, that's in the eastern part of Germany. And in 1979, that was East Germany, communist East Germany, right? So we have a West German couple moving to East Germany. What West German person would be doing this voluntarily, right? So they made a conscious decision to, usually they defect from the East to the West, but they defected the other way around, okay? Werner Stiller in his book reveals that they both had been members of the SED, that is the East German Socialist Unity Party. Werner Stiller had joined in 1965. They were already married at that point. She joined in 1966. They were not important agents. They were, underlings, but they had code names. Werner's code name was Schultz. Ingrid's name was Isabel. And they received payment, compensation for their service to country, for their service to East Germany. Both received full professorships as soon as they arrived in March of 1979 at the Karl Marx University in Leipzig. Interestingly, and this is still something I'm trying to work out, Werner said, thank you, but I'm going to do my postdoc in order to really earn this full professorship. Ingrid, she just said thank you and took the full professorship. So I'm thinking that she was more important than he was, right? That he was more concerned about really going step by step through the postdoc. That's how you do the full professorship over there in Germany process in order to gain that position. They were living in a small apartment, and there is a professor who had taught European history at Mizzou, who had known them for the while that they were at Mizzou. He then went on to do greater things at Chapel Hill, and I am in contact with him. He also published an article, and in this article, he briefly mentions the Deichs, and he views them, he actually had made contact with them in 1991, so that is after the wall was down. And he thought that they had become idealized members during the student movement in the 1960s. And I looked into the historiography of that, and the Free University in Berlin was really a recruiting ground by the East Germans to get agents, not important agents, but scholars, professors or future professors who could gain access to knowledge that would improve manufacturing, that would improve scientific research, and so on. And that's how she really fits into what the SED was doing in West Berlin. And the SED actually had a party in West Berlin, and they were running people to run the government off West Berlin. So they were not necessarily hiding anything. So it's still something I'm digging deeper, right? So we have found them. We know why they suddenly disappeared, but why did she use the excuse of having to follow her husband in order to allow him to have a career versus her having a career? Okay, so in order to find the answer to that question, I looked at her book that she published in 1984. So about 5 years after she had not returned, but moved to East Germany. And the title is Zwischen Dallas and New York. So translated is Between Dallas and New York. We're kind of in between. How I experienced the United States, notes during a residency. Okay, and it's a very fascinating book. Very much on the this is the cover, and immediately on that inside page you have those pictures, and then on the very last page you have these kinds of pictures. And initially, when you look at the title of the book, when you look at those pictures, you might think that this is a book, a positive book about all the awesome things that exist in the United States, and that you might want to come visit the United States, right? This is one of the weirdest books I've ever read. First of all, it lacks an introduction. It has absolutely no thesis whatsoever. All it does is divide this up into 4 parts. It's about earning money through work. It's about schools and university. It's about women, family, and television. And it's about politicians and power. Okay. There are a few addendums here. Americana, this is a summary of words. You know, she explains what a BA or a BS is, for example. Okay. Then she has, actually from a sociologist viewpoint, very good tables as an appendix about the rate of poverty in the United States, the rate of crime in the United States over certain periods of time, census information. So that part is actually what I would expect a sociologist to offer, okay? And then a few notes. There are a few notes, but they're very sparse. They don't really tell me what sources she used in order to write this book, whether she kept a journal while she was here. There's a mention of a couple of Paris newspapers and the Stern, which is the major magazine, political magazine in West Germany. So she had access to those things while she lived in East Germany. Tells you something about the power structure within East Germany too, who has knowledge and who does not have knowledge. Okay, so very, very interesting book. Then each of the chapters are subdivided into mini chapters, and they really talk about, in this case, for example, she's actually talked, she never uses the last name. I'm beginning to think this is the Tucker family that is referred to in the newspapers, but she's talking about the three children, Billy, Jessica, and Mabel, making the argument that nobody actually cares whether they get into college, into university or anything, because nobody tells them that that is important, especially to the girls, that they're expected to get married whenever high school ends and so on. So it is a very unique but also fascinating book for my purpose. She uses several photographs. They don't necessarily relate to the chapters within. It's like the photographs speak a language or have a theme of their own. Here, for example, we have firefighters in New York, and apparently 65,000 buildings burn every year in New York City. So she lets that sit out there. Then a photograph. This is Brooklyn with the shot over into Manhattan, okay? And in essence, what she is saying that the luster of wealth in Manhattan contrasts crassly with the poverty of Brooklyn. And here, the source of all wealth originates in the factories or the usage of factories in Pennsylvania. If you ever see a socialist ideology, it's right there, right? So these pictures have a language of their own. Interestingly, the front cover of what I call the bibliography page of the book, and where the ISBN is and everything, it says that 2 pictures are from her, the remaining pictures are from somebody else. I did a little research on that person. If you ever want to see somebody's background being erased on the internet, that's the person. There's one brief reference that he received the PhD from the Karl Marx University in Leipzig during the very same time as she taught at that university, but then nothing else. And then all of a sudden he reappears in what was then West Germany, it's just now Germany, but he is employed in a very high position at an Institute for International Peace. So definitely that would be a person who would not want to be associated with East Berlin, but I'm still digging. What was her opinion about Rolla? This is probably the question that everybody else has, right? She defined Rolla very much as a conservative campus. That's no news. So she was right on with that, okay? But in essence, she defined the way she understood students, meaning the students she had taught in her classes, most likely. But these students were opposed to anything big, be it big government, big business, big unions, or government regulations, okay? These students supposedly suggested conservative solutions to all of society's ills, including dealing with inflation through personal budgets. In other words, you save your money, you don't buy expensive things, therefore you put pressure on prices through your own little actions, right? Okay. You deal with unemployment through individual work ethos. In other words, don't just be lazy and draw unemployment, but actually work. Okay, work ethos, diligence, and social assent. Okay, so diligence and work ethos will eventually result in social assent. You deal with lack of local resources through smart use of foreign resources. You deal with crime through respect for law and order. And you deal with the Soviet threat through arms buildup. Okay, and what she found was unique was that the majority of the students on this campus already supported Ronald Reagan in 1976. Okay, so I know. Allegedly, I don't know if this is true. She allegedly quotes Department Chair Epstein as having come from the post office, and he was so surprised by what he had learned at the post office that he had to share that with her immediately, that only she and he were the only subscribers to the New York Times in this city, that the postmaster had revealed that to him at the post office that morning. Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not. She sees many of her, okay, there's already supported Reagan in 1976. She sees the students as not being very knowledgeable or interested in world affairs. That's when she put the New York Times quote in there. She also sees her colleagues as belonging to an old boy network opposed to any change, such as new teaching methods and women on campus, okay? She sees students as competing with each other constantly for grades, constantly for getting into the right fraternities, and constantly competing with each other for getting the right kind of job. So she looks at the university not as an experience, but as a competitive fight among the students, who is actually able to get the better job, the better fraternity, and thus the better connections and so on, rather than a good learning experience, okay? What does she see about Rolla, Phelps County? Well, it's rural Missouri. Yeah, definitely. That everybody is locally oriented and that they're not very cosmopolitan. Okay, so, well, she also is extremely surprised that there is a statue to a saint located in the library. She did not know that there was a saint for the engineers. And she also makes some comments about St. Pat's activities. She, in essence, sees them as students letting off steam because they've been competing with each other all this time, right? All that stress. So St. Pat's becomes a letting off steam occasion, but she also sees this as students associating their identity with both the campus as well as the community. So even after they leave, they still have that identity as having participated in St. Pat's, which only happens here on this campus in this city, okay? So it's both letting off a steam and creating this association, okay? Okay, I'm trying to click on a link and it's not going anywhere. Anyway, so, because I need to skip because I'm starting to run out of time. So why talk about Ingrid Deich? That's not, why is that not showing up? The last slide, why is that not showing? Because I highlighted it and it should be. Okay, it's that slide. Okay, but yeah. I had a link in the other one, but it's not working. That's the slide that's up right now. It's a slide. Where's the link at in this one? Over here in that corner. So I'm not, there it shows up as a hand. There we go. What did I do that? What did you do that I didn't do? That's how it goes, right? So why talk about Ingrid Deich? And I'm still trying to get to the answer, right? Why did she use the excuse? Ingrid Deich herself is a very fascinating person. You know, why would a West German defect to East Germany? Okay. She also offers us a little insight into how she viewed American life, her America built, which is not very positive, but is very critical of American society. The individual chapters suggest that Americans had great potential to fulfill ideologies like economic and social equality, but the reality of entrenched capitalism and power structures prevented that from happening. Her view of women was especially dim. I didn't do anything. Seeing them as subordinate to men despite the gains made at the workplace and through the feminist movement. This also leads me to believe that as a cover-up for her experience, she had to produce an excuse that was in line with her understanding of gender norms in 1979 Missouri. She thought that women in the United States, and in particular in Rolla, were not really truly equal to men, but still inferior to them. Thus, she crafted the excuse for her husband having finally found employment after several years of unemployment and dependence upon his wife. Consequently, she had to give up her own budding career to support his dreams. That was her picture of America, okay? And as she expressed in her book, of course, I'm still questioning, why did she write the book in the first place? Did she have to prove that she was a good East German because she had lived 8 years in the United States? Was this a requirement for her to keep her position because she didn't conclude her postdoc work? I don't know, okay? But we know, of course, from what I have learned about her, that the excuse was not really the truth. It was only a cover-up, right? I can only imagine the panic they must have felt when they learned that Werner Stiller had defected to the West. What are we going to do now? Are we just going to wait until the FBI comes and arrests us? Back then, by the way, Rolla had its own FBI agent, which of course must have been greatly embarrassing to that person too, that they had not discovered the presence of East Germans, right? But how long do you want to live under that fear of being arrested? Because there's no excuse, right? So the only future would have been arrest. So how do you disappear? Do you just disappear and don't say where you went? Because then they keep looking for you, right? But if you tell them, I had to leave because my husband got a job and I followed him to fulfill his dreams, they're gonna let go of me. Nobody's going to look for me anymore. And therefore we can quietly make it back to Europe, right? So that was her approach. That was their approach to using that excuse. But the actual excuse is based upon how she viewed American society as women being subordinate to men, even though they had had the opportunity to gain equality through the women's rights movement, the feminist movement. Thank you very much. I'm done at this point. Phew. Enough questions and answers.
Do have a few from online, unless anybody from the room. Okay.
Can I make a comment though? Since I worked across the hallway from her, she did not have a heavy accent. She was just a soft-spoken person that everybody could understand, and very, very gentle, likable, but mainly quiet. She didn't associate a whole lot with sitting down the hallway. Just everybody liked her. Shocked issue that when we learned about it.
Yeah. Yes.
So from what you've discovered thus far, it doesn't sound as though she or her husband were engaged in what we would traditionally call espionage.
Yeah,
And they
no,
were more like sleeper agents.
more or less, yeah.
So I don't understand why they felt the need to flee since they haven't done anything.
Well, we don't know that. I don't know, since she was at those nuclear centers, what other additional information about research did she know while she was doing her own research? And I know she had contacts.
But wouldn't that be publicly available to anyone?
Not necessarily.
Did she have a security clearance?
In the United States, no. In Germany, it appears yes, because she had unprecedented access to files at these research laboratories that very few people had. I mean, after all, she's a West German, right? So and she had credentials as being in the United States, getting her PhD, and subsequently working as a professor, as a sociologist here. So she was able to get through that clearance. I don't have 100%, but looking at the names of the people who are in charge of these individual research labs, she had direct access to them, and she doesn't hide it. She says, thank you in the article to such person, title, as Germans do, at such and such research.
Espionage she may or may not have committed would have been in West Germany rather than.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And, you know, extradition, so she would have been sent over there. Yeah.
What, maybe it's kind of going with what he said, information that she kept out. What, do we know what books she sent home? Because she might have had notes in those books. Because she obviously put them on the top shelf for a reason.
I don't know if any of this was ever carried through.
Oh, okay.
I have no idea. There are no further reports of anything being done. It's not in the personnel files. I have contacted a person by the name who came with a letter, who may be in Oklahoma, but I've never gotten a response. I've contacted all the people and I don't get responses, which of course they don't want to because they don't want to associate it. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. No, no, as far as I know, as of 2004, she was still alive because she wrote another book, very intriguing book, meets Romeo and Juliet and Ingrid and Werner. And I sent my niece to go get the book and take a look at it. And it's really about cats. They adopted a cat. The cat had 2 babies. Those 2 kittens are Romeo and Juliet. And the only other thing I learned is that they renovated a Fachwerk house. So one of those old timber structured houses. That's all I know. There's an address that's about 3 years old. I wrote to that address. Didn't hear anything back. So I tried.
So we have from online, so do we know anything about what Ingrid's husband was doing while she was here abroad? Was he still in Colombia or was he down here when she was down?
He was in Colombia through 1976. Sadly, he did not get tenure. And then after he was no longer employed at Mizzou, he actually came down here and lived with her here. He tried several attempts to find jobs here. He was trying to give a couple of talks, a couple of presentations, but he was never successful in getting a job here.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
I attended one of his talks. All the historians did, and we understood why he didn't get tenure. Because when that talk was over, none of us understood what the hell he was talking about. It was so poorly presented.
See, I couldn't reveal that.
Okay.
I was told not to reveal that.
You can quote me.
Okay.
Dr. Larry Craig
Yeah.
says, not a good
Primary
lecturer.
source.
So I think you touched a little bit on this at the very beginning, but what sources did you use for this presentation?
I use, of course, newspapers, the examples that I put on the screen. Of course, I used her book to gain an understanding in how she viewed American society, the personnel files that are available here at the campus. I was not able to get any personnel files at Mizzou. They're very strict in keeping something closed. If the person may be alive, you cannot look at it. Unless I have an obituary saying that they're both dead, then I can look at it. But those are the sources I used for the presentation.
Well, and the material in the personnel files, one of the folders was clearly not personnel files. It was a file that was kept on the.
Oh, yeah.
disappearance.
Yeah.
So
Some
we had copies of the telegram and
the letter of resignation.
weird interviews with students.
Yeah. And I still don't know who the person is, but every time there was a department meeting and they were updating the faculty, somebody kept notes saying, Mr. Epstein said this, Dr. Ridley said this, and so on. So I don't know who that person was. Jerry Cohen says it was not him. Okay. Gee, the mysteries are, we need to talk more.
Larry, where is Ingrid? Don't believe him. Do we know where the letter that the friend from Columbia had is at?
Yes, it's actually in the personnel files. Yeah. I said that's the weirdest.
But that's the person that you've not been able to get contact with
Right.
yet.
Right. Because the name is in the letter, in the files, actually mentioned in one of the newspaper articles. So I know the name. I know when the person got the PhD, so I can go back to the yearbook and the online records from Mizzou. That's not secret. And I went from there with the internet, and the internet tells me the person is in Oklahoma with a certain professional address, and that's why I wrote and didn't hear back. Probably.
Nice weekend trip.
I have a question about what kind of research you continue to do in UK. She moved back there, she becomes a full professor.
Uh-huh.
Does she continue to publish professionally outside of things like this, where it seems like she's trying to throw us off the scent?
Maybe. There's actually nothing during the age of East Germany that I can find, okay? There is a major article that she writes post coming down off the wall, post Cold War. I put quote war in quotation marks because we might still be in. But it's a co-authored article, and it talks about relationships at the workplace between workers and employers, union officials, and so on. So still the sociology aspect. So she's still doing some of that. And in that cat book, she also refers that she had a fulfilling, successful career as a sociologist. Okay, so they both were retired, and I'm saying were retired, did not do that necessarily voluntarily on their own volition in 1992.
So is there any record of like any students that she may have been the advisor for? That you could track down? Not here, but there.
Oh, there? No, there's nothing. Again, weird thing, Leipzig gives on the internet Vanner's CV and not hers, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Or she's a spy to cover.
It's,
Or was it really Ingrid that went back to Germany?
Yeah.
Epstein went to Ohio State for this. Do you know if he's still alive?
yes, he is. I'm in contact with him.
Oh, good.
Yeah, yeah. He'll be looking forward to the Zoom recording because. Any other questions? No? And nobody from Germany?
Well, we actually have somebody watching from their soccer practice.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And
Cool.
I do have, oh, Epstein, post office incident regarding New York Times subscriptions not true, at least as far as he can remember.
Okay. Cool.
And
Thank
then-
you.
Oh, yeah, at least the campus library should have been having a subscription.
And then
Well,
I
that's-
do have a comment from a Conrad
Yarouche.
Jarouche.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not gonna be able to pronounce that. He mentions US missile sites, and then both were fired in Leipzig during the unification, and then she ran a consulting agency after 1990.
Okay.
Oh,
Cool.
very good.
Yeah, we need to meet. Zoom or in person, Conrad. That's it.
So, but also from Conrad, sorry, this was earlier, so, did you know that Werner was, he was refused tenure, which you mentioned? And both mentioned taking a picture of something. So Conrad, of US missile sites, was that what it was?
Oh, I did not know that. Oh. That,
Another twist.
that thickens the plot even further if they're taking pictures of missile sites. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, the title of the book is, it's don't have that much time. And I jumped over it. It says between Dallas and New York. They may have visited friends in New York, according to the book. But as far as she talks about, she doesn't really talk about the city of Dallas. She talks about that other city of Dallas, the television show.
Awesome.
And she takes it to pieces, right? That that JR is the arch representative of capitalism in the United States, and that he can become the punching bag for every ordinary worker who needs television to relieve him of all the stress and disappointments that they're experiencing in real life, right? So I jumped over that, but she really does a good job about the meaning of cowboys, the mechanical bulls, whatever, and what is it, Mickey Gilley, their role in the 1970s, where she got the information, but she does an awesome job on that.
So, did you find any confirmation of the story that the day someone knocked on the door to get her out of class, that someone viewed Werner dumping the contents of a briefcase into a trash?
I hope I have permission from Dr. Ridley. There was a rumor that perhaps Dr. Christensen saw him do that, and Dr. Ridley says, no way, because Dr. Christensen would have never stopped talking about it. So that is still a mystery. There is a reference to that in one of the newspaper accounts that somebody viewed Banner dumping all kinds of papers and stuff in a major dumpster. We still don't know who it is. So if you know who you are, please contact me.
So if Dallas is an allusion to you said Dallas and then further into capitalism, it's New York about the stock exchange.
She never goes into that. She only talks about a person she knows from New York and how disappointed that person is about not achieving success and so on. Yeah. But with Dallas, she really wants to know why West Germany took on that show, because it started here in 1978, and she writes that she only saw one show, and she said, I'm not going to watch that. I'd rather watch Bob Newhart or Rhoda. Okay, now we're aging ourselves if we know what that is. But then she gets interested in Dallas after she comes to Germany, because living in East Germany, every East German had access or virtual access to West German TV. So a lot of, and I found evidence in scholarly articles to that with numbers, that they knew about the Dallas television show and that the East Germans were just enamored with that show, just like the West Germans were. And she wanted to know why. So she really goes into that, the ordinary worker, of course, watches it because he can let out all his frustrations by watching JR get caught and whatnot.
I was a Dynasty fan.
Yeah. And then there was Knots Landing, right?
She was shocked, Jay.
It's all a dream.
It's all a dream, that's right.
That was Bobby's dad.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure, you're welcome. You're welcome.